My name is Cole Harrison. I'm 44 years old, and I grew up believing that if you take care of the land will take care of you. My grandfather taught me that lesson standing on the old cedar dock stretching into our lake. My father repeated it every spring when we stocked fish, repaired the spillway, and cleared fallen branches after storms. I never imagined I'd spend the biggest fight of my life trying to stop my own neighbors from burying that same lake. The morning I watched the first dump truck tip its bed and send thousands of pounds of dirt crashing into the water, I felt something inside me break. They smiled while they did it. They thought they had won. What they didn't know was that the lake wasn't just a fishing spot hidden behind my ranch. It was part of the drainage system that protected their entire subdivision from flooding. By the time they understood what they had done, it was already too late. The first warning came almost 2 months earlier. It was a calm Texas morning just after 6. The sun was barely climbing over the oak trees, and a light mist floated across the water. My black Labrador Ranger waited patiently at the end of the dock while I tied a fresh lure onto my line. Fishing wasn't just a hobby for me. It was how I remembered my family. Every cast reminded me of my grandfather laughing when I caught my first bass. Every ripple carried memories of my father teaching me how to read the wind. That lake had been in our family for more than 50 years. People around town called it Harrison Lake. Technically, it was a private reservoir built decades earlier with county approval. Fed by a natural spring and protected by an engineered spillway, it collected stormwater from several surrounding properties before safely releasing it into a downstream creek. Most people never noticed the concrete control structure hidden beneath the cattails. Engineers did. County officials did. And so did anyone who had ever studied the flood maps. The problem was, the homeowners living in the brand new subdivision next door didn't know any of that, or maybe they simply didn't care. When my father passed away 6 years earlier, I inherited the ranch along with every responsibility that came with it. 230 acres, a weathered red barn, 3 cattle pastures, miles of wooden fencing, 1 gravel entrance road, and the lake. Life was peaceful until developers built Cedar Ridge estates on the neighboring property. At first the families were friendly. Kids waved from bicycles. People introduced themselves over backyard fences. Some even bought fresh eggs and beef from me. Then the HOA took control. Almost overnight everything changed. Suddenly I started receiving official-looking letters. Residents request access to the lake. The shoreline should be landscaped for community appearance. Dead timber visible from subdivision lots should be removed. Please discuss future shared recreational opportunities. I laughed the first time I read one. Then I threw it away. The second letter went into the trash too. By the 5th letter I realized they weren't joking. One Saturday afternoon, while repairing a fence near the pasture, I noticed 3 strangers carrying fishing rods toward my dock. I drove over in my pickup. More and I called. One man smiled. "Beautiful lake."
It is.
"We're going fishing." "No, you're not." His smile faded. RA said residents could enjoy the common lake. "This isn't common property." He frowned. "Less it is." I pointed toward the county survey marker embedded beside the gravel road. "No, it isn't." The couple standing behind him exchanged nervous looks. "We thought this belonged to the neighborhood. It belongs to my family." After a few awkward seconds they apologized and left. The man never did. As he climbed into his SUV he looked back and said something that stayed with me. "This won't stay private forever." I shrugged it off. People say foolish things when they don't get their way. A week later I met the person responsible. Her name was Rebecca Collins, president of the Cedar Ridge Estates HOA. She arrived in a spotless pearl white luxury SUV wearing expensive sunglasses, polished brown riding boots, pressed blue jeans, and a perfectly fitted white blouse. She stepped out smiling like we were old friends. "Mr. Harrison?"
That's me.
"I'm Rebecca Collins. I know who you are." I was hoping we could talk about the lake. I leaned against my fence. "What about it?" "Our residents absolutely love it. I'm glad they enjoy looking at it." She laughed politely. "Would like to discuss shared access." "There isn't any. You haven't even heard the proposal." "I don't need to." She removed her sunglasses. "It would really improve neighborhood relations. My relationship with the neighborhood is fine." "Our homeowners disagree. They're welcome to." Her smile slowly disappeared. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I answered calmly. "I'm protecting private property." She crossed her arm. "You know, lakes like this usually become community amenities. This one won't. Things change." "Not this." She stared at me for several seconds before turning back toward her SUV. As she opened the driver's door, she stopped and looked over her shoulder. "We'll find another solution." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. It wasn't a threat. It sounded more like a promise. Over the next several weeks, strange things started happening around the ranch. Fence gates were left open. Trail cameras disappeared. Fresh tire tracks appeared near the shoreline. Beer bottles and food wrappers littered the dock every Monday morning. Someone even nailed a homemade sign to one of my oak trees that read NEHBO or SBO DFA. I removed it within minutes. The next day another one appeared, then another. I installed better security cameras, motion lights, a new steel entrance gate. The sheriff's office increased patrols after I reported repeated trespassing. Most people backed off. The HOA didn't. Instead, the pressure became more organized. Anonymous complaints reached the county about imaginary code violations. Rumors spread online claiming I planned to sell the ranch for commercial development. Residents began demanding that the county protect community access before it was too late. None of it was true. Then one morning I noticed bright orange survey flags stretching along my western fence. At first I thought the county had scheduled road improvements. But when I checked the coordinates against my property map, my heart skipped. The flags pushed the property line nearly 15 feet into my ranch, right through the shoreline. I immediately called the licensed survey company whose name appeared on one of the stakes. The owner sounded confused. "We didn't place those markers, you didn't know. Someone copied our flag colors." Within the hour, 2 licensed surveyors arrived with GPS equipment. Their measurements confirmed exactly what I suspected. Every marker was fake. Someone had intentionally moved the apparent property boundary toward my lake. The lead surveyor shook his head. "I've seen boundary disputes." He looked across the shoreline. "But I've never seen fake survey markers placed this professionally." He handed me a signed report. "If this ends up in court, call me." I thanked him and drove straight to the county records office. The clerk confirmed my deed had never changed. The ranch, the lake, every inch still legally belonged to me. Driving home I felt relieved. Whoever was behind this had failed. I believed the worst was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Because exactly 19 days later, I woke before sunrise to the sound of heavy diesel engines echoing across my ranch. When I stepped onto my front porch, my coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. A line of dump trucks was rumbling toward my lake. Behind them crawled 2 bulldozers and a massive tracked excavator. And standing beside my front gate, calmly giving directions with a clipboard in her hand, was Rebecca Collins. For a split second, I honestly thought I was looking at the wrong part of my ranch. There was no way anyone would be bold enough to bring heavy equipment onto private property in broad daylight. Then the first dump truck rolled straight through my open service gate. The driver never even slowed down. I sprinted off the porch, jumped into my dark green Ford F-250, and headed toward the lake with Ranger barking from the passenger seat. By the time I reached the shoreline, 5 dump trucks were already lined up beside the water. Rebecca Collins stood near the excavator, talking with a man wearing a bright orange safety vest. She looked surprisingly relaxed, like this had all been planned for weeks. I stepped out of the truck. "What do you think you're doing?" Every worker stopped. Rebecca turned toward me with the same practiced smile I'd seen before. "Good morning, Harrison. Get every one of these trucks off my land." She glanced at the foreman. "Continue." The first truck raised its bed. 30 tons of packed clay and construction fill thundered into the edge of my lake. The splash echoed across the ranch. My stomach dropped. "Stop." I ran toward the truck. The foreman stepped between us. "Sir, stay back. This is private property. We'll have paperwork." "Show me." Rebecca calmly opened a folder and held up several documents. "County approved drainage improvement." I took one look. The county logo looked real. The signatures looked convincing. But one thing immediately stood out. The property description wasn't mine. It referenced land inside Cedar Ridge Estates. I handed the papers back. "These permits don't authorize work on my ranch." Rebecca's expression didn't change. "Our attorney disagrees." "I don't care what your attorney says." I pointed toward the lake. "Every load dumped here is trespassing and property damage." That she folded her arms. "That's your opinion." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "This is Cole Harrison. I have multiple dump trucks illegally entering my property and destroying my lake." The dispatcher promised deputies were already on the way. Rebecca actually laughed. "We called them first." That caught me off guard. "You what?" "We informed the sheriff's office we were beginning approved drainage work." I looked around. This wasn't an accident. This was coordinated. Within 10 minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. Deputy Mike Jensen climbed out first. He recognized me immediately. "Cole." Mike stopped them. He walked over to Rebecca. "Mom, can I see your permits?" She handed him the same folder. He spent several minutes reading every page. Finally, he looked at me. "These documents appear legitimate. They don't cover my property." He checked again. I pointed toward the legal description, read the parcel number. He compared it against the county map on his tablet. His eyebrows narrowed. "Hold on." He zoomed in, compared it again, then looked back at Rebecca. "This permit applies to subdivision common property." "Correct," she answered. "So why are you working here?" She hesitated. "Our engineer determined the drainage feature extends beyond the recorded boundary." I shook my head. "That's not how property law works." Deputy Jensen turned toward the equipment operators. "Shut everything down until this gets sorted out." Rebecca's smile disappeared for the first time. "We have a schedule." "I don't care." One truck stopped. Another didn't. Before anyone could react, the 6th truck dumped another massive load directly into the narrow channel feeding the lake spillway. The foreman immediately realized his mistake. His face went pale. He jumped out of the cab. "I thought you said this was the fill area." Rebecca stared at him. "It is." "No." He pointed toward the concrete structure. "That's a spillway." The driver beside him looked equally concerned. "You told us it was an abandoned pond." "It is." I couldn't help smiling. "No, Rebecca." I walked toward the spillway. "This lake is part of a county-approved stormwater retention system." Silence. Every construction worker looked at one another. One quietly removed his hard hat. Another whispered something to the excavator operator. Rebecca frowned. "That's ridiculous." "It really isn't." Deputy Jensen asked quietly. "Cole, what exactly does this spillway do?" "It regulates runoff from nearly 4,000 acres. His eyes widened. "And if it's blocked?" I looked toward the fresh pile of dirt already sliding into the outlet. "Stormwater has nowhere to go." Nobody spoke. The foreman slowly turned toward Rebecca. "You never mentioned that." She looked irritated. "Because it isn't relevant." He answered immediately. "It becomes relevant if we're filling flood control infrastructure." The excavator operator climbed out of his machine. "I'm done until someone from the county gets here." Several truck drivers nodded. Rebecca's confidence started slipping. "You all signed contracts?" The foreman crossed his arms. "I signed up to move dirt." He pointed toward the spillway. "Not destroy county infrastructure." 15 minutes later, 3 county vehicles pulled into the ranch. A stormwater engineer stepped out before the trucks had even stopped. He introduced himself as Daniel Brooks. Without saying much, he walked directly to the spillway. He knelt beside the concrete outlet, measured elevations, compared maps, checked survey coordinates. After nearly 20 minutes, he stood up and looked straight at Rebecca. "Who authorized this?" "Our engineering consultant." He looked around. "I'd like to meet that consultant." She hesitated. Daniel didn't smile. "I imagine he is." He walked toward me. "When was the last inspection?" "About 8 months ago." He nodded. "Matches our records." Rebecca interrupted. "Our neighborhood has standing water issues." Daniel answered without looking at her. "And this structure prevents those issues from becoming catastrophic." The word hung in the air. Catastrophic. Even the construction workers looked uneasy. Daniel continued. "If this outlet becomes blocked during a major storm," he pointed toward Cedar Ridge Estates below the hill, "water doesn't flow through the subdivision." He paused. "It flows into it." Rebecca finally looked uncertain. "Surely you're exaggerating." Daniel slowly turned toward her. "I sincerely hope I am." He ordered all work stopped immediately. County inspectors photographed everything. Survey crews marked the original shoreline. Drone operators documented every pile of dirt. By sunset, every piece of heavy equipment had left my ranch. Rebecca climbed into her SUV without saying a word. As she drove away, I felt something I hadn't felt all day. Relief. Maybe this nightmare was finally over. But Mother Nature had been watching everything, and 3 nights later, the weather forecast changed. A slow-moving storm system settled over central Texas. Meteorologists warned of record-breaking rainfall. Standing on my dock, watching dark clouds gather over the horizon, I couldn't stop staring at the partially buried spillway. Because I knew something almost no one else did. If that blockage wasn't removed before the storm arrived, Cedar Ridge Estates wasn't going to have a drainage problem. It was going to have a lake. The rain started just after midnight. At first it sounded peaceful. A steady rhythm against my metal roof. Ranger slept beside the fireplace while I sat at the kitchen table staring at the live weather radar on my laptop. One storm cell after another rolled across our county. By 3 in the morning, more than 5 inches of rain had already fallen. By sunrise, the creek feeding Harrison Lake had transformed into a roaring river. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my rain jacket, and drove the ATV toward the spillway. The water level had risen nearly 3 feet overnight. Normally that wasn't a problem. The spillway would release the excess water at a controlled rate. But it couldn't. Half of the outlet was still buried beneath thousands of pounds of compacted dirt. Water churned violently against the blockage, carrying branches, logs, and debris into an ever-growing dam. I immediately called the county emergency office. "This is Cole Harrison. The spillway is failing. If we don't clear it soon, the subdivision downstream is going to flood." The dispatcher didn't hesitate. "We're already sending crews." Within 30 minutes, county engineers, sheriff's deputies, and emergency management officials arrived. Daniel Brooks stepped out of his truck, took one look at the water, and shook his head. "We're running out of time." The excavators were requested immediately, but another problem appeared. The saturated ground around the lake was too unstable for heavy equipment to reach the blockage safely. Every minute mattered. Then my phone rang. It was Rebecca Collins. For the first time since I'd met her, she sounded terrified. "Our streets are flooding." I looked toward the subdivision. Water was already spilling over several curbs. "It'll get worse." "What do we do?" I answered honestly. "Move everyone to higher ground." She went silent. "You were right." I wasn't trying to be right. The line disconnected. By noon, emergency alerts were sent to every homeowner in Cedar Ridge Estates. Police cruisers blocked entrances. Firefighters went door to door helping elderly residents leave. Families carried pets, photographs, and whatever belongings they could fit into their vehicles. Dark clouds continued pouring rain. Then came the moment everyone feared. With a deafening crack, the dirt packed against the spillway collapsed. A massive surge of muddy water blasted through the remaining blockage, carrying soil, broken fence posts, and tree limbs downstream. The current rushed through drainage channels faster than they had ever been designed to handle. Several neighborhood streets disappeared beneath water. Dozens of backyards flooded. Garages filled within minutes. Fortunately, because the evacuation had already begun, no one was seriously injured. Standing beside Daniel Brooks, I watched helicopters circle overhead while news crews arrived. Daniel looked exhausted. "This would have been far worse if we'd waited another hour." I nodded quietly. Neither of us celebrated. People's homes had been damaged. Children were crying. Families were watching years of memories soaked in muddy water. It wasn't a victory. It was a preventable tragedy. The investigation began the very next morning. County inspectors recovered drone footage showing the trucks dumping dirt into the lake. My security cameras captured every vehicle entering the ranch. License plate readers documented arrival times. The surveyors testified that the fake boundary markers had been intentionally placed weeks earlier. The construction foreman admitted under oath that he had repeatedly asked whether the work site was private property and was assured everything had been approved. Then investigators discovered something even bigger. Rebecca Collins had never hired a licensed civil engineer. The so-called engineering report presented to contractors had been created by an unlicensed consultant who copied old drainage maps from public records and altered them to support the OA's plan. Those altered maps became the foundation of the entire operation. When state investigators compared the originals with the modified versions, the differences were impossible to ignore. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation while dozens of homeowners hired their own attorneys. Ironically, many of those lawsuits weren't aimed at me. They were aimed at the HOA. Several residents later admitted they had no idea what the board was planning. They had simply trusted the people elected to represent them. 6 months later, the county courthouse was filled beyond capacity. Homeowners, reporters, contractors, county officials, everyone wanted answers. I testified for nearly 4 hours. I explained how my grandfather had built the lake, how my father expanded it with county approval, how the spillway protected both my ranch and surrounding properties. Every permit, inspection record, and engineering report and survey was entered into evidence. Then Daniel Brooks testified. Using maps, photographs, and flood models, he showed exactly how the dirt placed into the lake reduced the spillway's capacity. His conclusion was simple. The flooding was not caused by the storm alone. He looked directly at the jury. It was significantly worsened by the unauthorized dumping inside the lake. The courtroom became completely silent. Rebecca Collins eventually took the stand. She insisted she believed the work was legal. She blamed contractors, consultants, surveyors, even county staff. But every excuse unraveled under cross-examination. Emails showed she had ignored multiple warnings. Meeting minutes revealed board members questioning the legality of entering my property. One message stood out above all the others. It had been sent just 2 weeks before the trucks arrived. If we make the lake unusable, Harrison will eventually give up and sell. The jury didn't need long. The HOA was found financially liable for the damage caused to my property and for a significant share of the flood-related losses suffered by homeowners. Rebecca resigned before the final judgment was entered. Several board members followed. The association's insurance refused to cover actions that had been carried out outside its authority, leaving the HOA responsible for millions of dollars in costs. Over the following year, restoration crews worked alongside county engineers to remove the remaining fill from the lake. The shoreline was rebuilt using native vegetation. New fish habitat was installed. The spillway was reinforced with additional monitoring equipment. The county also recorded a permanent protective easement around the drainage structure, making future interference far more difficult. One afternoon, nearly a year after everything happened, I was repairing the old dock when a pickup stopped at my gate. A man climbed out carrying a small tackle box. I recognized him. He lived in Cedar Ridge Estates. He walked over slowly. "I owe you an apology." I set my hammer down. "For what?" "I believed the rumors. I thought you were just a stubborn rancher trying to keep everyone out." He looked across the lake. "I didn't understand you were protecting something that protected all of us." I smiled. Most people didn't. He reached into the tackle box and handed me a hand-tied fishing lure. "My father used to make these. It's beautiful. I thought you should have it." We stood there quietly, watching the water ripple in the afternoon breeze. A largemouth bass broke the surface near the old dock. Ranger, now older and slower, lifted his head but didn't bother chasing it. He simply watched, just as he always had. The lake looked almost exactly as it had when my grandfather first showed it to me decades earlier. Peaceful, strong, worth protecting. Some people believe ownership is about fences, deeds, or property lines. I learned it's also about responsibility. Because when you care for the land, you're often protecting people who don't even realize they're depending on it. And every time I cast a line into that water now, I remember one simple truth. The strongest foundation isn't built on dirt. It is built on doing what's right, even when you're standing alone.